And he says, oh, Holy Spirit, I want you with me at all times. You'll see that a lot, that when the Spirit of God is partnered with the gifts and the fruit and the actions of the Holy Spirit all throughout the Old Testament. Where was the Holy Spirit in the Old Testament? Okay, I showed you creation, but what about the rest? Did he just like peace out and then appear in the book of Acts? We're going to go after this, and then we're going to go after who is he in the New Testament and in your life. Ruach Elohim, Ruach. Whenever in the Old Testament that you see the phrase, the Spirit of God, it's the same thing as seeing the phrase in the New Testament, Holy Spirit. All right, that's really important. So whenever you say Spirit of God, picture Holy Spirit. All right, that's the third person of the Trinity showing up. And I'm going to prove it to you right now. Exodus 31, verse 3. It says, and I filled him. Okay, this is the man. He was designing the tabernacle for God. He said, I filled him with the Spirit of God, the wind of God, the breath of God, the third person of the Holy Spirit, with wisdom, with understanding, with knowledge, and all kinds of skills. 1 Samuel 10:10, the Spirit of God came upon him and he began to prophesy. That was with Saul. Psalms 51:11, David cried out, don't banish me from your presence. Don't take your Holy Spirit from me. This is interesting, it's this word Ruach Elohim, but David goes even further. David adds this Hebrew word Kodesh in front of it, which means holy. So David was the first one to say this holy Spirit of God, this holy breath of God. So David recognized even more. He literally uses a New Testament understanding and calls him the Holy Spirit. And he says, oh, Holy Spirit, I want you with me at all times. So David knew the Holy Spirit. 2 Chronicles, the Spirit of God came on Zechariah and he said the word of the Lord. Ezekiel, the Spirit took me up and gave me a vision. So this is important too. In the New Testament, 1 Corinthians 12:8, it talks about the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Notice this, the gift of the Holy Spirit was what? A message of wisdom and knowledge by the Spirit. When the Spirit showed up in Exodus, what did he give him? It says he filled him with wisdom and knowledge. Okay, what about this? It says here in that the gifts of the Holy Spirit that there's a gift of prophecy. When the Spirit of God came on Saul, what did he do? He prophesied. You see, all these times the Spirit of God comes on somebody in the Old Testament, you also see the gifts of the Spirit function in that moment. This is further proof that it's the Holy Spirit. Spirit of God comes on him, and what does he do? He walks in the gifts of the Holy Spirit. That's a further understanding to show you. You'll see that a lot, that when the Spirit of God is partnered with the gifts and the fruit and the actions of the Holy Spirit all throughout the Old Testament. This phrase, though, this is what is different. People ask me, well, what was different with the Holy Spirit in the Old Testament versus today and the New Testament? It's this phrase. You'll see this phrase almost every time you see the Spirit of God coming. It says this, that he came upon them. Notice this. It says, Balaam, he says, saw Israel abiding in the tents according to the tribe, and the Spirit of God, what? Came upon him. Came upon him. 1 Samuel 10:10, they came, right? And the prophets met him. And what happened? The Spirit of God, what? Came upon him. 2 Chronicles, and the Spirit of God came upon Azariah. You always see these phrases in the Old Testament. Spirit of God came upon. Spirit of God came upon. It's this pattern in the Old Testament. Spirit of God came upon Zechariah. And the minute he'd come upon them, then all of a sudden, boom, they'd be functioning in the gifts of the Spirit. That word come upon, it's this word labus, and it means to dress, to wear, and to clothe. So it's like a jacket. So that if you threw this jacket on me, you would say this jacket came upon Taylor. It was not an inside event. It was an outward covering that would come upon for a moment and then would lift off. All right? So that it was temporary, coming on, lifting off, coming on, lifting off. And for the moment that the clothing of the Holy Spirit was on, they could function in the gifts. But when it lifted off, then they no longer could function with the gifts. But this is the beauty. This is the difference, is it was prophesied. There will be a man who comes and he will be the Messiah. And this is what's different, is it says the Spirit of God, the Spirit of the Lord will rest upon him. It doesn't say the Spirit of God will come upon the Messiah. It says the Spirit of God will rest on the Messiah, meaning it will come and it will stay. And it says, this is how you will know who the Messiah is, that the Ruach Elohim will stay with him at all times. John 1:33, Jesus confirms this. He says, John the Baptist, when he saw Jesus, God gave John the Baptist the same marker. He says, hey, he says, the one who sent me to baptize with water said to me, he on whom you see the Spirit descend and remain, this is the one who baptizes with the Holy Spirit. So that's the difference. That's more proof that for people it was temporary, but for Jesus, the sign that he was the Messiah was the Spirit would remain with him at all times. Hey, real quick, did you know that I actually have a bunch of free resources for you? Hit the links in the description below, and I'm going to give you one free ebook on how to hear God's voice, 8 biblical ways on how to hear his voice. And if you want to go deeper and learn to hear God, hey, consider taking a look at my Bible study. We've had so many people around the world go through it, and it's helped activate them in how to hear God's voice. I'll put the link for that Bible study in the description. But that's enough. Let's jump right back into the video. So, then it was prophesied that it'd come on one man, the Messiah. But then Ezekiel said, there will be a day, though, when what was on the Messiah, the remaining Holy Spirit, will fill inside of you. It'll no longer be a garment that comes upon you, but he will be someone who lives within you. This is the difference. Ezekiel 36 says, I will give you a new heart and a new spirit I will put within you. I'll remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh, and I will put my spirit, my ruach, it's the word ruach, my breath, my spirit, the name of the Holy Spirit, I will put inside of you. So they're saying, whoa, there's going to be a day when the Holy Spirit doesn't just come on us and then leave, but there's going to be a day when he comes and he stays. This was what the Old Testament prophets and the people looked forward to as a promise, that one day we will have a Messiah, but there was a second promise, and one day the Ruach Elohim will live within us. That's the promise, and that's the New Testament believer's reality. So Jesus says this, because remember, the Holy Spirit was with him. Jesus' own words. He says, I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper. He's talking about the Holy Spirit. To be with you forever. The Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it neither sees him nor knows him. He says, you know him. Isn't that weird? Jesus says, you know the Holy Spirit. He says, because he dwells with you. How does the Holy Spirit dwell with them yet if Pentecost didn't happen? Because it said the Holy Spirit was resting on Jesus. And so the Holy Spirit was always with Jesus, which meant if Jesus was standing next to Peter, the Holy Spirit was right there next to Peter. And so he's like, no, Peter, you know him because he's been with you this whole time, because he's with me. He's like, he dwells with you right now, but still it's different language. It's he's with you, next to you. He's like, but he will be in you. There will be a day when he fills you, Peter, John, disciples. So the Old Testament, to kind of conclude this, the Old Testament reality was this verse, Isaiah 61 or 63. It says, they remembered the days of Moses. Where is he who brought them up out of the sea with the shepherds of his flock? Where is he who put his spirit in the midst of them? So the Old Testament reality was that the Spirit was with them in moments, right? But there was a prophecy that I will put my spirit within you. And the New Testament reality is now this. 1 Corinthians 3 says, do you not know that you now are a temple of God and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? It's really important as a Christian to know that difference of it was that he was with you. It was promised that he would come in you, and now he's within you. So every time you see Old Testament, Ruach Elohim, Spirit of God, you say, whoa, that's the one who's in me. And Pentecost is that day that came. It said, suddenly a sound like what? A wind. Just like when I was at camp, a rushing wind came upon them, filled the whole house they were in. They saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each of them. And all of them were filled with the Holy Spirit. No longer is the Holy Spirit clothing them. No longer does the Holy Spirit come on them. The Holy Spirit is within them. So here we go. That's it for the Old Testament before we jump into the next section here. What questions do you have right now about anything about what I just talked about? Clarity questions, any questions about Holy Spirit in the Old Testament, anything like that. And then the next section is we're going to jump into what about now? What about the Holy Spirit now? So if you want to watch that video, go ahead, jump in right over here. That's the next one up. And if you want to watch the entire live stream I did on the subject, everything about the Holy Spirit, check out this one right up here. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.